All right, we welcome you once again to today's session, project management, where we are looking at project selection. That's the unit in question that we are considering today, project selection. Yesterday we previously looked at how to plan the project, but now how do you select the project? You may be aware that companies are always, having limited resources, they have limited time, and because of that, the limitedness of the resources, they need that everywhere where they invest their resources, they should be able to get the maximum possible level of return. Okay, the maximum possible level of return. So now, what is project selection? Project selection is basically the process of choosing a project or a set of projects to be implemented by the organization. So that process of choosing a project or a set of projects that needs to be implemented by the organization day in and day out is what is called project selection. Now, you know that a successive model must be, there to capture every critical aspect of the decision. So a more complex decision typically will require more sophisticated models. Now, there is a simple solution to every complex problem. Unfortunately, it is wrong, right? Is there a simple solution to every complex problem? No. Project selection decisions are high stakes because of their strategic implications. So the projects a company chooses can actually define the products it supplies, the work it does, and the direction it takes in the marketplace. So the project decisions can actually impact every business stakeholder. It can impact the customers. It can impact the employees. It can actually impact the partners. It can impact the regulators. It can impact the shareholders. So you can see that a sophisticated model may be needed to capture the strategic implications. So the project decisions are dynamic because a project may be conducted over several budgeting cycles. Now, with repeated opportunities to slow, accelerate, rescale, and terminate the project. Now, a successive project may produce new assets or products that create time-varying financial returns and other impacts over many years. So a more sophisticated model is needed to address the dynamic impacts, right? So the project decisions typically produce many different types of impacts on the organization. For example, a project might increase revenue, or it may reduce the future costs, right? It might impact how customers and investors perceive the organization as well. So project decisions are very, very important, right? Because these decisions entail risk and uncertainty. What could be the criteria for choosing the project model, right? The criteria that we should use to choose the project model, right? Now, when a firm chooses a project selection model, the following criteria based on SODA are most important. For example, the model should reflect the reality of the manager's decision situation. Okay. It does include the multiple objectives of both the firm and its managers. So without a common measurement system, the direct comparison of different projects is actually impossible. It should show the capability, right? The model should be sophisticated enough to deal with multiple time periods. It should be there to simulate various situations, both internal and external to the other projects. Let's say that let's say that an optimizing model actually will have to make the comparison that management deems important. For example, when we try to consider the major risks and the constraints on the project, so then we can select afterwards the best overall project or the set of the projects that we want. So the other aspect that we can use in, or the other criteria that you can use in choosing the project is the issue of flexibility. The model actually should give valid results within the range of conditions that the firm might experience. So it should have the ability to be easily modified or to be self-adjusting in response to changes, right? You may not just choose that model which is so fixed and so static such that it is not accommodative to the changes that occur in the, in the whole management process. Because sometimes you find that, let's say, you find that there are those random changes that occur, right? So it's very important for the project to be considerate and factor in all that. The model should be easy to use, right? It should be reasonably convenient and not take a long time to execute. And it should be easy to use and understood. It should not require special interpretation, okay? The data that are difficult to acquire, excessive personnel, and unavailable equipment actually can be very, very difficult and unsuitable in this case. You don't need those models which need the data that are not easily available and very difficult to acquire or even to process and analyze. Right. The cost, the issue of the cost again should be considered when choosing the model, because data gathering and modeling costs should be low relative to the cost of the project, and it must surely be less than the potential benefits of the project. You can see that all costs should be considered, including the cost of data management and of running the model, right? So all costs should be considered. That should include the cost of data management and those costs of running the model. Is the computerization. It should be easy and convenient to gather and store the information in computer database and to manipulate data in the model through the use of widely available standard computer packages such as Excel, eViews, Stata, statistical package for social sciences, SPSS, Lotus, 123, Quattro, Pro, and like other programs. So the same ease and convenience should actually apply to transferring the information to any standard decision support system. Now, what are some of the types of project selection models, right? We have different types of project selection models that we have. And let's start with the first one, which is non-numeric project selection model. Let's start with the non-numeric project selection models. The first one is called the sacred cow. Okay, this is the first model we have, the sacred cow. Now, the senior, and he power official and the powerful official in the company, they suggest the projects in this case. This is a sacred cow. So mostly the project is simply initiated from an apparent opportunity or a chance which follows an established idea for a new product. So for the designing and adoption of the latest information system with the universal database for establishment of new markets or for some other categories or projects that demands the investment of the resources of the organization. So the project is actually created as an immediate result of this blunt approach for investigating about whether the boss has supposed whatever the boss has actually supposed. So now, sacredness of the project reflects the fact that it will be continued until ended. or till the boss himself announces the failure of the idea or he ends it. That's a sacred cow. Then there is also the operating necessity. Now, if a plant is threatened by the flood, then it is not much complex and effective to start a project for developing a protective desk. Now, this is actually best example for the operating necessity, right? Potential projects are evaluated by using this criteria of project selection by XYZ Steel Corporation. So you see that there are some certain questions that come in front if the project is needed in order to keep the system functioning, like is the estimated cost of the project is estimated for the system. Now the answer of such important question is yes. Then the project's cost should be analyzed to ensure that these are maintained as minimum and compatible with the success of the project. The competitive necessity. In the late 1960s, let's say XYZ Steel considered an important plant rebuilding project by using this criteria in its steel bar producing facilities near Chicago in 1960. It was clear to the management of the company that certain modernization is required in its bar mill in order to keep the current competitive position in the market area of Chicago. So perhaps the project has modern planning process. So the desire to keep the competitive position of the company in the market provide basis for marketing, for making such decision to carry out on the projects. Let's say certain undergraduate and master in BA Business Administration, MBA programs are restricted in the offering of many universities to keep their competitive position in the academic market, right? Presidency is taken by the operating necessity projects over competitive necessity projects regarding investment. But both of these types of project selection models are considered much useful and effective as compared to other selection models. The product line extension. In the case of the product line extension, a project is considered, the one that is considered for development or distribution of new product will be evaluated on the basis of the extent to which it suits the company's current product line, fortify a weak line, and fuse a gap, or enhance the line in a new or desirable direction. So in certain cases, careful evaluations of profitability is not actually needed. So the decision makers can perform actions on the basis of their belief about the probable influence on the addition of the new product to the line over the entire performance of the system. What about the comparative benefit model? Now, according to this selection model, there are several projects that are being considered by the organization, right? Those subsets of the projects are selected by the senior management of the organization, okay? Okay, so now the example that we can give is that some projects are related to the new products. Some are related to the computerization of particular records, and others are related to make alterations in the method of production, and some of them may contain such area that cannot be easily categorized. Let's look at the comparative benefit model. Now, there is no formal method of selection of projects in the organization, but it is the perception of the selection committee, okay, members, that certain projects will benefit the company more than the others, even if they lack the suitable way to specify or to measure the proposed benefits. Actually, it is just based on their ideas. Those the project selection committee, so they perceive and then choose. What about the comparative benefit model? Now, for all sorts of projects, if not a formal model, the concept of comparative benefits is enormously used for selection decisions. For example, the US companies considering various social programs for providing funds to them, they use this concept to make these decisions. All the considered projects with positive recommendations are examined by the senior management of the funding organization in order to make effort to develop a portfolio that can effectively suit the objectives and budgets of the organization. Let's look at the Q-SOT model. The Q-SOT model. Now, the Q-SOT model is the one of the most straightforward techniques for ordering projects, right? According to their relative merits, the projects are first divided into 3 groups, which are good, fair, or poor, right? So the main group is further subdivided into the 2 types of fair minus, fair plus. If any group has the more than 8 members, then the projects within each type are ranked from best to worst when all types have 8 or fewer members. So again, the relative merit provides the basis for determining the order. Specific criterion is used by the rater to rank each project, or he may actually use the general entire judgment. That's what usually happens sometimes. Is there an example of a Q-SOT model, right? If one person has the responsibility to carry out the process for evaluation and selection of the project, then in certain cases, there is a selection committee for performing such processes. Now, if the task is handled by the committee, individual ranking can be built anonymously, actually, and the committee examines the set of anonymous ranking for consensus. Now, these rankings differ to some degree from rater to rater, but that difference is not much enhanced because the selected individuals for such committees seldom differ increasingly on their consideration for the suitability of the parent organization. So you can see that finally the projects are selected on sequence of preference, though they are generally assessed on financial basis before final selection. These models that we have just discussed are non-numeric models. What about the numeric project selection models now? The numeric project selection models. These they help us to analyze the profitability. Profitability is actually used as the only measure of acceptability by a majority of organizations using different types of project selection models. So the following are some of the numeric models. Number 1, payback period. The payback period is one of the models. The average rate of return, the discounted cash flow, internal rate of return, IRR, the profitability index, PI, and other profitability models. What about the payback period? Now, the initial fixed investment in the project is divided by the forecasted annual net cash flows, inflows from the project. Okay, that is referred to as the payback period for the project. So the number of years needed by the project to refund its initial fixed investment is reflected in the ratio of these quantities. So for example, suppose a project costs 200,000 to operate and has an annual net cash flow of 40,000. It costs $200,000 and it has got the annual flow of what? $40,000. Then the payback period will be 200,000 divided by what? 40,000. 30,000, and that gives us 5 years. So approximately it takes us 5 years for this project to give us the money that we invested, or the initial investment. What about the average rate of return? Now, the ratio of the average rate of return, the average annual profit, okay, to the average or initial investment in the project is referred to the average rate of return. It is mostly understood as the reciprocal of payback period, all right? So the average rate of return does not generally equal the reciprocal of the payback period, because average annual profits are generally not equivalent to the net cash inflows. So in the above mentioned example, suppose the average annual profits are 30,000. Instead of 200,000, they're just 30,000. So you can see that the average rate of return would be the 30,000 divided by the initial investment, and that gives us 0.15, or the 15%. So none of the two above mentioned evaluation methods are effective for project selection. The payback period is frequently used, and it does show the reasonable value for decision related to cash budgeting. Now, these two models have major advantages in the shape of simplicity, but none of them cover the important concept of time value of of money. There is none of them that covers the concept of the time value of money. What about the discounted cash flow? The discounted cash flow method is also called the net present value method, NPV, right? Let's say, for example, the net present value of all the cash flows is determined by discounting them by the required rate of return, okay? So let's say the net present value NPV of the project is the AO plus the summation of the future values divided by 1 plus K to the power time. So where K is the required rate of return, then FT is actually the net cash flow in period T, and the A is the initial investment. When you do the summation of these are discounted cash flows, then you subtract the initial investment, what you get is the net present value. Now, the decision rule is, if the net present value so the decision rule is, if the net present value NPV is positive, then the project is worthy undertaking. If it is negative, the net present value is negative, then the project is not good, okay? It means that the money that you invest in is higher than what you're going to get from the project. But if you find that the net NPV is 0, it means that you get exactly the amount of money that you invested in the project, right? Now, there are two sets. Let's talk about internal rate of return, right? The internal rate of return. Now, with the internal rate of return, if there are two sets of expected cash flows, one for expected cash inflow and the other one for expected cash outflow, then the internal rate of return is the discounted rate that equalizes the present values of the two sets of or flows. Now, profitability index. About the profitability index, let me say something about the profitability index. So with the profitability index, the net present value of all future expected cash flows is divided by the initial investment that is referred to the profitability index, right? The net present values of all future, expected cash flow, then you divide that by the initial investment, it is giving us the profitability index. So therefore, the profitability index is also called the benefit cost ratio. The project may be accepted if this ratio is higher than what? Higher than 1. Now, these models that we have just explained above, all right, have different variations that fall into the following 3 groups. Number 1, those that further split the net cash flow into components that make up the net flow. Then we also have those that contain particular terms to acquaint risk into assessment. We also have those that widen the analysis to review impacts that the project can have on activities or projects in the company. Are there any advantages of profitability numeric model? All right. Number 1, several comments are in order about all the profitability numeric models. First, number 1, the undiscounted models are simple to use and understood, or they all use readily available accounting data to determine the cash flows. The model output is in terms familiar to business decision makers, and that is what usually happens. Are there any disadvantages of the same profitability numeric models? These models ignore all non-monetary factors except risk. Again, the models do not include discounting. They don't include discounting. They ignore the time value of what? Of money. The models are that are there, the models that reduce cash flows to their present values are strongly biased towards the short run and not in the long run. So the payback type models, they ignore the cash flow beyond the payback period. And all these are some of the models that we have explained. So in a nutshell, we hope that you have known how to select the projects. You don't just wake up and select the project. You have to consider all these elements and factors that we have just mentioned. Are there any questions? Okay.